The first time I saw her, she didn't even bother to say hello. She strode across the gravel driveway like she owned the entire mountain and pointed straight at my grandpa. "You can't be here," she snapped, her sunglasses flashing in the sunlight. "This is private property." "HOA rules." Grandpa didn't even react. He was sitting on the porch of our old family log cabin, sipping coffee from the same dented mug he'd been using for nearly 30 years. He looked her over slowly, let out a tired sigh, and said, "Ma'am, I've been here since before your HOA even existed." That clearly wasn't the answer she wanted. "I'm Karen," she barked. Of course, she was. President of the Mountain Pines Homeowners Association. "I don't care how long you've been squatting here. This property doesn't meet updated codes. You need to vacate immediately, or we'll file a formal complaint." I had just stepped outside the cabin in the middle of making breakfast after hearing her voice rising. The woman glanced at me like I was part of some strange mountain cult. "This cabin belongs to my family," I said calmly. "It's been here since 1964. We're on our own land." Karen instantly pulled a clipboard from under her arm like she was drawing a weapon. "There's no HOA approval for a permanent residence at this address. And this porch," she added, gesturing at it like it personally offended her, "is a violation of Building Code 18B. Grandpa leaned forward slightly, completely unimpressed. "Karen, is it? You're barking up the wrong tree." "I don't care who you think you are," she snapped. "We're cracking down on unauthorized structures. Too many freeloaders are dragging down property values in this neighborhood." I glanced around. The closest neighborhood was a 5-minute drive down a winding dirt road. Mountain Pines had mostly turned into overpriced vacation homes, most of them sitting empty 10 months out of the year. Our place was the last real cabin left on this stretch of land, and it meant everything to Grandpa. She tore a notice off her clipboard and handed it to me. "You have 72 hours to vacate or appeal to the board." Then she spun around and stormed back to her shiny Range Rover, kicking up dust as she sped down the gravel road. Grandpa stayed quiet for a long moment. He just stared out at the trees. "She really doesn't know who I am, does she?" he said finally, almost amused. I raised an eyebrow. "Apparently not." He took another sip of his coffee while the breeze rustled the pine branches around us. "Well," he said with a small grin, "this should be interesting." The next morning, Grandpa was already awake. He was dressed in a clean button-up shirt, slacks, and his polished boots, the ones he usually wore to official functions. He was humming while pouring his coffee like nothing unusual had happened the day before. "You going somewhere?" I asked, still rubbing sleep out of my eyes. "Oh yeah," he said cheerfully. "Thought I'd stop by the HOA board meeting to..." I blinked. "Wait, how do you even know when it is?" Grandpa smiled. "Made a couple of calls. They're meeting at the community clubhouse at noon. Karen's going to love seeing me there." "What exactly are you planning to do?" He didn't answer right away. He just gave a slow smile, like a man holding a winning card. "Let's just say I'm going to remind them who actually makes the rules around here." At 11:45, we pulled into the freshly paved parking lot of the Mountain Pines clubhouse. The building looked nothing like our old cabin. It was a modern stone and glass structure that felt completely out of place on the mountain. The lot was already half full with luxury SUVs and expensive sedans. Inside, a couple of dozen people were milling around, sipping free coffee and avoiding eye contact. Karen stood at the front of the room, straightening papers and adjusting the microphone. The second she saw Grandpa walk in, she froze. He nodded politely. "Morning, Karen." Her eyes narrowed. "This is a private meeting. Homeowners only." "I'm aware," Grandpa replied calmly. "I believe I qualify," she scoffed. "I seriously doubt that. I've already filed the violation notice. You can request a hearing, but you need to leave." That's when the mood in the room shifted. A few people looked up. Someone whispered to their spouse. Grandpa calmly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather ID wallet. He flipped it open so she could see it. "Harold James, County Supervisor, District 3, he said evenly, "which includes Mountain Pines and every HOA within it." Karen's face instantly went pale. The microphone squealed slightly as she tightened her grip. You're the Harold James?" He smiled faintly. "Guilty as charged." Been serving this county since 1998. I also helped draft the original zoning plan for this mountain, which, by the way, clearly exempts pre-existing private properties from retroactive HOA enforcement." The room went completely silent. People started pulling out their phones. Karen blinked rapidly. "But there's no documentation. Your cabin isn't in our registry." "That's because it predates your registry by 3 decades, Grandpa said calmly. "And that overreach ends today." He turned toward the rest of the room. "Shall we continue?" Karen stood frozen behind the podium, gripping her stack of paperwork as if it might save her. Murmurs spread through the room. A few people even clapped. A man in a golf shirt raised his hand awkwardly. "Mr. James, are you saying the HOA can't enforce rules on older cabins?" Grandpa stepped forward. "Not exactly, but Mountain Pines HOA was created in 2005. My cabin was registered with the county in 1964, and the land it sits on is privately owned. It was never part of your deed-restricted development." He paused. "That means your rules don't apply to it." Karen looked stunned. "But the noise, the unpermitted renovations, there have been trailers and campfires. There are bylaws," she insisted, flipping through her binder. Grandpa shook his head. "Our campfires are legal and within state burn limits. The trailer you saw was registered and parked for less than 72 hours. I've followed every applicable county rule." Then he turned to address the entire room again. "But more importantly, the purpose of an HOA is to serve the community, not bully it. When it becomes a weapon used by a few people, everyone loses." Several people nodded. Even a few of Karen's supporters shifted uncomfortably. Karen cleared her throat, her voice tight. "If you believe we're acting improperly, Mr. James, then perhaps you'd like to bring this up in a formal hearing." Grandpa smiled slightly. "No need. As county supervisor, I'll be reviewing your charter and any recent code changes that might conflict with state property law. And if I find any irregularities, I'll be making recommendations starting with how complaints are filed and enforced." The room buzzed quietly. Karen looked like she wished the floor would swallow her. Just then, a gray-haired woman near the front stood up. "Harold, I remember when your father built that cabin," she said warmly. "It's part of this mountain's history. Anyone trying to erase that doesn't belong here." The room broke into light applause again. Karen stood stiffly, saying nothing. Grandpa gave her one final nod. "I trust we won't be receiving any more unlawful notices, but I'll still have that violation letter reviewed by the county legal team just to be safe." Karen didn't respond as we turned and walked out. Outside, the air felt cool and fresh. Back in the truck, I looked at Grandpa. "You didn't have to go that hard on her," he chuckled. "Son, I didn't even break a sweat." Word spread quickly after that. By the end of the week, the HOA newsletter, usually just a dull list of landscaping reminders, featured a vague correction about enforcement boundaries and a new policy. Any action against a resident would now require legal review before it could be issued. Karen's name was noticeably missing from the president's message. Grandpa didn't mention it. He simply went back to his usual routine, splitting firewood, fixing up the old Jeep, and drinking his morning coffee on the porch like always. But every now and then, when he checked the mail and found nothing from the HOA, I'd catch a quiet little smirk on his face. A few days later, we were up on the roof fixing a small leak when another SUV rolled up the driveway. This one definitely didn't belong to Karen. A younger guy stepped out, maybe mid-30s, wearing a Mountain Pines HOA badge. He raised his hand in a careful wave. "Hi there, Mr. James." Grandpa climbed down the ladder slowly. "That's me. I'm Derek," the man said, looking a little nervous. "Vice President of the HOA. I just wanted to say, I didn't realize you were Harold James. We looked into your property and, well, you're completely exempt. All your documentation checks out." Grandpa gave a small nod. "I figured as much." Derek shifted awkwardly where he stood. To be honest, a few of us on the board weren't really comfortable with how Karen handled things. "She tends to escalate situations." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a polite way of saying she abuses her authority?" He let out a nervous chuckle. "Let's just say the board is reconsidering some leadership roles." and we'd like to offer an apology on behalf of the HOA. We were out of line. Grandpa extended his hand. Apology accepted. After Derek drove off, Grandpa went right back to hammering shingles like the conversation had barely happened. But later that evening, as we sat around the fire pit behind the cabin, he said something I didn't expect. You know, he said quietly, poking the fire with a stick, I never wanted power. He stared into the flames for a moment. I just wanted a place where my family could breathe fresh air, away from all the nonsense. You think that's still possible? I asked. He looked out toward the dark pine trees as the first stars appeared above them. It is, he said. As long as we don't let people like Karen chip away at it little by little. He tapped the stick against the firewood. That's how freedom disappears. Not with some big explosion, but with paperwork and fake rules. I nodded quietly. Behind us, the old cabin stood tall in the shadows, weathered but proud, just like Grandpa. And as the wind moved through the trees and the fire burned low, I realized this place wasn't just a cabin. It was a legacy. If you enjoyed watching Karen get humbled by the most unbothered grandpa in the county, don't forget to hit that like button. Got your own crazy HOA story or a power-tripping Karen in your life? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want more small-town justice, wild confrontations, and satisfying endings like this one, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what Grandpa does next.